Thanks for coming to the session, guys. Just a reminder, we're trying to record the whole conference. So even though it's a small room, it's tempting to sing your questions out. Please just raise your hand. I'll get a mic to you. However, for this talk, the mic has to be here for the laptop. So if possible, save your questions to the end and we'll just do them all in one go. It'll be a whole lot easier to get it all on audio. Everyone, please welcome James Gollan, speaking about media on your website. Please welcome James.
Hi, again, welcome again. Better? Yep. Welcome for the third time. It could be a presentation of welcomes, I think. Media savvy. So this talk is going to be about media, so it ties in quite well with what we just spoke about, and also what Dries brought up in his keynote. A little bit about me. Name's James Gollan. On Drupal.org, I'm GollyG, and on Twitter, GollyG. And I'm a contractor, and I'm currently contracting with Previous Next, and they've been generous enough to fly me down here and sponsor a room. So today what we're going to be talking about is pretty much how we work with media in our Drupal 7 sites. All right, so first we're going to be talking about files in Drupal 7, how Drupal 7 core actually, what it gives us out of the box, right? Because there have been big improvements from Drupal 6. So we're going to look at those and sort of like consider what they offer us. We're also going to look at the shortcomings. We're going to look at the media, I've called it the media suite of modules because there's a few modules that are downloaded when you download media. But we're going to have a quick look at those and what they're offering us. And then finally we're going to move on to basically a site recipe, which is going to be how can you get media working in a reliable way on a Drupal 7 site using the media module. And I don't want to spoil the ending, but it's not all good news, okay? So, yeah. All right. When I started, I've worked for the ABC, and I actually was the tech lead on the initial Pool site. And so Pool was a site that was built by the ABC in Drupal 5, and it was all about user-generated content, users uploading videos, remixing, sharing media. So there was a lot of media handling, and it was done in Drupal 5. And I'm sure you've all sort of like worked in a situation in Drupal 5 and Drupal 6, and possibly even Drupal 7, where you're using Node as a wrapper for media, and then you're using, it just gets messy. So my dream with working with media in Drupal is that you have your nodes and your file entities. You can field all of them, okay? So they're all treated as sort of like a first level content item. They're sort of like, and so files and nodes are just different forms of content. Then they become fieldable, so you can create those entity relationships between nodes and files. But it's important to note that files still will be viewed by a user as a like first level content item. So you're not looking at a node with a file attached to it, you're actually looking directly at the file and all of its fields, right? So, I mean, I suppose in my head, files were essentially just another form of content that should be uploadable, editable, consumable, and it should have a lot of the benefits that you have with nodes without having to wrap it in a node. And that certainly has not been the case in the past. Now, I've got to contextualize this. I have a 6-year-old boy, and I had to promise to him I'd put in some Lego, all right? So the way I've actually, you'll find some random photos in here which are Lego related, and it's not because well, it may be partly because I'm a bad presenter, but it's also because I'm a good dad, okay? So you're going to have to bear with me for this, all right? So this first video, I guess what it's trying to, well, how I'm going to sort of try and sell this to you is it's my experience walking along going with confidence saying, okay, Drupal 7, files or entities, handling media in a Drupal 7 site is going to be fine, right? And then it's slowly collapsing around me. So if you can...
Well, this is a minor setback, but don't be afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not at all afraid, because I am in charge. Not now, and I shall find a way. I said not now. look at our ship. Oh, R2-D2, how could you let this happen? Build another ship? How exactly do you suggest we do that? But this is just pictures.
Media module.
Where are the words? I may be fluent in over 6 million forms of communication, but this is impossible. I'm afraid.
Okay, I guess that essentially was my experience with Media. It's all going to be okay. There's a Media module to handle this. You start installing it, playing around with it, and suddenly it all just sort of falls apart. Documentation's hard to find. Okay, so hopefully we're going to actually at least steer you through some of the potential problems and maybe some potential solutions. First, and I don't need to point out the link between these images and files in Drupal 7. It's all clear to you? Yes? Yep, good. Okay, so Drupal 7. Probably the major thing that actually occurred with Drupal 7 was the whole entity system. Now, you've heard about the entity system a number of times, I imagine, in this conference already, so I'm not going to go into it in a great lot of detail. But the most important thing for the purpose of this talk is that in Drupal 7, files are actually defined as entities. Okay, so that's core, out of the box, you get a file entity. And these entities, so when you upload a piece of media, it becomes an entity, a file entity, and they're attached to nodes using a file field. So essentially what we're getting is a node with a field that creates an entity relationship to a file, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the dream scenario in terms of the way that I was thinking. Okay, so that's all really good. And we're creating this entity reference in the file. Now we're going to look at another thing that the Drupal 7 API actually offers. Right? So first of all, we've got files as entities. The Drupal 7 file API offers us this concept of managed versus unmanaged files. So really, it's just it's a much more mature API for handling files in your Drupal 7 site than existed in Drupal 6. There were a number of file API functions in Drupal 6, but they weren't quite as well thought out. And one of the major concepts we're going to be considering is managed versus unmanaged files. So the file API provides these functions, and I'm not going to go into particular functions here, but these functions for handling files on your site. And they're loosely sorted into unmanaged files and managed file functions, and they basically mirror each other. The big difference between a managed and unmanaged file is a managed file actually has an entry in your Drupal database. Okay, so there's a files managed table, and that files managed table stores all the information about the file entity. So it gives the entity ID and some of the extra data around the file. Any operation on a managed file, so using the file API, using a managed file API function, will also track this in the database, which is clearly really important, all right? Because unmanaged files are not known to Drupal. So you can actually do things on the file system through the Drupal 7 API that can allow you to copy and edit and move, do things like that for files. But because they're unmanaged, they're not in the database, and Drupal 7 is pretty much unaware of them. Right? There's no way of actually looking these files up. And really the only way you can reuse them, they'll still sit in the files directory if that's where you place them. But the only way of actually reusing them is just raw hyperlinks that point to that public file path. Right? So for the purpose of this talk, we'll really be considering managed files, because that is really how you want to work with your files. All right. Any questions on just that bit? No, okay. Another really important concept you've probably heard about is stream wrappers. Right, so stream wrappers were introduced into Drupal in Drupal 7, right? And they allow us a lot more flexibility in dealing with files. Okay, so first of all, stream wrappers haven't been invented by Drupal. They're actually part of PHP core. And a stream is, well, PHP has this, I don't know if it's a programmer humor of recursive definitions, but they call a stream simply a resource object which exhibits streamable behavior. Huh? Look up streamable behavior. Yeah. But essentially, a stream is like just like a flow of data, and streamable behavior means that you can seek, you can download, you can possibly upload. And so Drupal 7 has incorporated this into the way it actually handles files, and that gives us a lot of flexibility. A stream wrapper actually wraps around these data streams. So these data streams can come from a lot of different places. They can come from the local file system, they can come from the internet, they can come from sort of like FTP requests, they can come from curl requests, they can come from PHP itself. But it doesn't, they can come from like compressed libraries. It doesn't sort of matter where this stream has come from. Stream wrappers give you that abstraction, which means that you can actually, you can be sort of like completely unaware of what kind of stream it is you're dealing with. You can just refer to it using the same functions. And then it's the job of the stream wrapper to interpret your requests and handle the data in the way that is appropriate for that stream. Stream wrappers, you'll see this a standard sort of pattern for referring to stream wrappers, where you've got scheme, : target, right? So the scheme, you often will like refer to that as the protocol, like you'll see it as a protocol, so it looks familiar to you because it looks like a normal link. So the scheme tells you basically what stream wrapper is going to be used to handle the bit that comes after it. Right? So the target is where you can actually put in pretty much any syntax you like, as long as you define that in your stream wrapper and you know how to handle it. Now, in core Drupal 7, these stream wrappers, it ships with basically 3 additional stream wrappers. So Drupal has actually extended PHP stream wrappers to add a bit more sort of Drupal functionality to them, and it's shipped with 3 defaults, and they're probably going to be instantly recognizable to you. So the public stream wrapper essentially defines the public directory on your Drupal site. Right? So really, all the stream wrapper here is doing is it's looking at that public, and then it's taking the bit that comes after it, and it's converting the public space into whatever you've set your public file directory to be in your variables table. And then it's just like looking for a file within that space. Anybody tried to move your public files directory in a Drupal 6 site? And to your horror, the variable is actually stored in the file path in the database, and you've actually got to go through and change that. There's probably I'm sure there's a module that does it for you, but when you see these things which are actually set as variables and they're hard-coded into sort of like file paths, it's kind of frightening. With Drupal 7, that's no longer going to happen because the stream wrapper is clever enough to look up the variable and sort of basically prepend it onto the URL string. We've also got the private stream wrapper, which essentially resolves to a non-web accessible directory on the server. And so that's where files that you don't want somebody to be able to guess the URL or to type in the URL and go directly to the file, you keep them in the private directory, and that way Drupal has the chance to basically intercept that call and map it out correctly. And finally, you've got your temp directory, which is really where files are stored when you're uploading them or performing operations. So files in the temporary directory are obviously of a temporary nature, and they will eventually either be deleted or moved into one of the other 2 sort of like more permanent data stores. PHP also gives you some stream wrappers out of the box, okay? So that typical ones are sort of like the FTP, HTTP stream wrappers, and yeah, a standard file stream wrapper. Okay, the reason we're looking at this is because later on in the talk, Drupal Media actually uses stream wrappers a lot to actually define external providers. Okay, so another big thing, remember we're still talking about Drupal 7 just out of the box, we haven't got to Media yet. Another big thing about the that's provided is this notion of file usage. So each time you actually create a link from a node using the file field field, Drupal 7 will track that link. So there's actually a table dedicated to this called file usage. And each time you actually make a link to an entity, that is stored in the table. And the real advantage of that is that we can designate a file being in use, and this is actually used to stop accidental deletion of a file which is referred to from a node. So you won't be able to delete a file that has actually is currently in use, right? So that's a really like handy thing to, because like sometimes you see files in your system. Am I using it? Am I not? Should I delete it? And so this allows for tracking of what files are in use, and it makes it easier to maintain that files directory. Okay, so look, there's been some really great movement in dealing with media, but field entities are not fieldable. Sorry, file entities are not fieldable. I think there's a sort of like a slight misconception that because everything's entities now, everything is fieldable. And I certainly thought that at first. I thought, wow, entities are fieldable. That was almost sort of an analogous kind of thing. However, entities are not by default fieldable. So when they actually built the file entity, and I've read a few things, and one of the things was they just basically ran out of time to get it stable. So they went without making them fieldable, right? So in core, even though you're using an entity, we can't add fields to files. And that's kind of profound because in that sort of like earlier idea I had of their first level content items, but I can't add any of the metadata that I want around my file, right? So it could point us back to, okay, well, I've got a great idea. Let's use a node to wrap around that file and add metadata there. Yeah, so we're back to square one. Next thing, I mean, file entities out of the box are not easily reusable, which, again, it's a sort of profound thing. Like one of the things about actually separating out files from nodes is that they're suddenly reusable. You don't, I mean, we've all done it where you upload an image twice. It's the same image because it's the easiest way to get it on 2 pages. The promise of files as entities is that they can actually be reused. So we've got the kind of the core for that, and we've got this whole file usage system, but the interface doesn't make it easy to add it to a new node. And finally, I mean, this is just like, there is actually no user interface for managing file entities. So you can upload all of these entities, and that's great. But actually finding them, doing stuff with them in Drupal 7, you can't. So what we've got here is basically the, sort of like the underpinnings for a great system, but one which hasn't been fully realized. And I think that's pretty much where enter the media module. Now, that should give you, that's going to give you a false sense of confidence, actually, because Yoda doesn't muck anything up, all right? Nah. Okay, so the media module. This is some stuff taken from the media module documentation page, all right? And so this is kind of like the big picture, the goal that they had for the media module. Media's aim is to solve Drupal's long-standing media handling problem. And it's interesting to hear in Dries' keynote this morning, if you're there, like, who wasn't there, that he identifies it as not only one of the biggest problems facing Drupal 8, one of the biggest problems facing not just enterprise, but medium and small sort of like business owners as well. And it's got a red, okay? Red was bad as far as I interpreted that graph. So I'm not sure how we're going with actually hitting this goal. Further on, framework provided by the media module, helping to unify many of the current multimedia and file efforts, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what they're identifying here, and it's absolutely valid. In Drupal 6, there were a plethora of media handling modules, and those modules all were basically reinventing the wheel to sort of like do what they wanted to do. So a lot of those module developers got together and said, this is crazy, we just need to basically move towards this kind of like whole API module model and then make it pluggable. And that way we don't have to deal with all of the same problems in lots of different modules. And you know, conceptually, that is a fantastic idea. That's exactly where you want to be moving. But the effect on people actually working with media and wanting to work with media in Drupal 7 has not been so great. It's not been so rosy. I think that a lot of people have probably installed the media module because they wanted mfield. I don't know if anybody's used mfield in Drupal 6 where you embed YouTube videos and things. That module was not ported to Drupal 7. It was moved into the media module. So I think a lot of people are actually in a situation of, I've got this huge sort of like kind of buggy module just to embed my YouTube videos, which I could do in Drupal 6 without thinking. Yeah, so no, that's the reference to those actual quotes. So the current state of the media module, right? How many people have got media module installed and you're running it? Yeah, like a lot of people, yeah. Okay, the first sort of like absolutely perplexing thing is media has two branches, right? The 7.1 branch is a release candidate 3, although it seems to have some major blockers in it out of the box. So whether or not it's actually going to sort of like become stable in its current state, I'm not sure. I think there's things to be fixed. And then there's the 2.x branch, which actually they have gone to the extraordinary lengths of adding unstable to the actual branch name. But it's kind of like the recommended one to use. So it's a really difficult situation. And like I said at the beginning, like the spoiler alert, there is no right answer to this, and there's no answer that's going to get you all of the way. I think before I go into that, one thing I'd like to say is that the decision between those two branches, I'm going to be demonstrating the 2.x branch because it's got some features which I think most of you will find useful. The 1.x branch I've done work with, and with a couple of patches it can get you to a point where it's going to be stable and it's not going to change. So the current state of the 1.x branch is that it's considered feature complete, but it's going to have bug fixes applied to it. All right? So if you need that stability, you're not prepared to sort of like rework things, or you're not prepared for it to break in different ways, go with the 7.1 branch. If you're working with a lot of files, or you're in for the long haul and you're prepared to do some work on it, the 7.2 branch is kind of the future of it. All right. Okay, so one thing, the media module relies heavily on the file entity module, right? And the file entity module, it does some of these things that we talked about in Drupal 7 that it doesn't do out of the box, which is sort of like a real relief. First of all, it makes files fieldable, right? So it actually gives a full implementation of the field sort of like API on files, which means you can treat them in exactly the same way that you treat them as nodes. You can add fields to them, and you can deal with files in that way, which means you can start adding metadata, reusable things that can be pulled into multiple nodes. It makes files reusable, all right? So, I mean, it actually allows you to link to sort of like multiple files through a picker, sort of like a media file widget, which again, incredibly useful and sort of like it's, yeah, just absolutely crucial to what you want to be able to do. And of course, it provides an administrative interface for files on the system, right? So not only can you upload your files onto the system, you can now find them and edit them or delete them, all right? So that's kind of nice too. That should have been a sort of yay times 1.5 or something, I don't know. And finally, it also handles sort of like, sorry, that should be view modes. It provides a UI for actually working with the view modes. Okay, just a quick sort of rundown on how file entity actually works. When you install file entity, by default, Drupal 7 there's one file entity. No bundles, really. Everything is a file, and it's treated the same way. As soon as you install a file entity module, it will do a couple of things. First of all, it will create bundles, okay, file bundles, which are basically sort of like different subtypes of the file entity. And these are the ones that in the 2.x branch it will create. In the 1.x branch it creates fewer. Basically, it doesn't create the text and application. But the bundles that will be created, so the file types that it handles are video, image, audio, text, application, and other. And if you're sort of familiar with kind of file MIME types, really that's the sort of like the first part of the file MIME type. So you might get sort of like video / MP4. So MP4 is the subtype, video is the main type. Right, so they sort of match to sort of like I don't know if it's ISO standard, but they're standards around MIME types, and they match to many of those standards. Then once it's actually created these kind of like file entity bundles, it'll go through all the files that are currently on your system. So if you're sort of like installing it after you've actually done some work on your site, and it will process those files. And based on the file extension, which kind of is, whilst it's not necessarily the same as the MIME type, it makes the assumption that it is. So based on the file extension, it'll place them into the corresponding node bundle. File bundle. Right. So what it's going to do is organize your files into these kind of like main sort of file entities, which is actually incredibly useful. We're going to be looking at all of this. It's actually going to turn practical in a sec, and we're going to be looking at actually installing this stuff and configuring it, because that is the next kind of like, yeah, blow your mind sort of thing. But the media module, so what does the media module actually do? Well, basically it provides the extensible and unified widget, right? So when you actually choose a file on the system, that is being provided, the widget that pops up will be provided by the media module. It provides a formatter for displaying file entities of any type, right? So we actually just use one formatter, and then the formatter is actually sort of like, will intelligently go through and sort of like match up the correct formatter for the kind of media that you've uploaded, if you've configured it correctly. And also various sort of like API functions for basically providing what we were talking about before, that sort of like unified API that other modules can plug into and work with, right? Okay, how spoiled is my boy? Well, actually, no, I should read. How spoiled am I? I got to buy a Lego Millennium Falcon this Christmas, and so it's in the presentation because it ticks all the boxes, right? So we're actually going to move into the practical like demo now, but before I do it, I'll sort of like talk you through what I've got set up. And 30 minutes before this presentation, on the 10th, sort of like reinstall where everything had gone perfectly, white screen. So I'm hoping it's all okay now. I think it's fixed. But yeah, the live demo thing, I've heard the warnings and I didn't listen to them, essentially. All right, so the setup we're going to be using the 2.x branch, but I have done a lot of work with the 1.x branch, and happy to talk about sort of like how to actually get that working, because there are a couple of patches that are in the issue queue. Some of them I submitted just because I was creating this demo and it just wasn't working, so we can get that working in the 1.x branch. The media element, so tying into that sort of like display of media. Libraries, media, YouTube, CK Editor. Okay, CK Editor is currently the editor that the media team have spent most of the time integrating with mixed results. Well, actually, maybe not mixed. Maybe they're all the same result. Just not the result we're after. And the WYSIWYG module, yeah. Okay, so I think... it's a dependency. Oh, I haven't. Okay, I didn't, because I changed from 1 to 2. I didn't actually include it because it used to be packaged with the media module, like in the 1.x branch. Yeah, so that's a good one. The file entity module actually has to be downloaded. You can't install media without it. It's going to be listed as a dependency. All right. Oh, and this patch. All right. Yeah, there's 6 more patching slides. Okay, there's not really. Okay. There's this one sort of like patch which is just a yeah, fix some of the theming. Just like, you know, it squashes a little kind of error that'll come through. And if we get time, we're going to demonstrate a couple of sort of like, they're not even modules yet, but they're kind of things that add more features, and they're going to be pushed into the 2.x branch. Okay, so I'm going to start the demo. Any sort of like questions before I start the demo? Like, I mean, or should we just leave them until later, or there are no questions? Yeah. Okay. All right, so. Okay. All right, so this is the Drupal 7 site, and I've pretty much sort of like downloaded all of the modules and installed them so that we can start from pretty much a clean install and we can walk through the configuration. I won't go into it, but like, I mean, some of the modules that we're going to be using, the media element module, which is to display the HTML5 video, and the CK editor, they require external libraries which can't be packaged into Drupal because of the licensing differences, and so you have to go and download them, but I'm not going to go through that process. It's all documented on the actual page. So we're going to start by actually configuring a node bundle to actually work with media. Right, so content types, and I'm going to just use the article field, and what I'm going to do is go into manage fields. You can use the media widget with an image, but we're actually going to just trash that or edit it. Why not? No, I wanted to hit that. Okay. Right, and we're going to add a file field. Okay, so the file field is what we're going to use to store all of our media. Doesn't matter if it's an image or a video, it's just going to be used. Now, first gotcha. Field type file. Okay, it doesn't show up anymore in the 2.x branch. If you're using the 1.x branch, there was a multimedia field type. Right, and it was the recommended one to be using. Okay, so you would actually, instead of using file field, you'd swap it over to multimedia. And in fact, it did a lot of work trying to convert files you already had into that format. That is now deprecated, so stop doing it. But we now just use the file field type. If you want to use the 1.x branch, I've actually submitted a patch to get the formatters working with files in the 1.x branch. Okay, so you can actually apply that patch and it will work. I found it works fairly reliably. Okay, so we choose file. We choose a file type, and then importantly, the widget, the media file selector. All right. Now this is just a standard file field. Okay, so the configuration is pretty much stuff that you've been doing all the time. We're just going to make it a public file. I'm not going to set too many configuration options. Really, the only thing that I'm going to do here is specific to the browser plugins. All right, so what this configures is how the media pop-up is going to look when you upload a file of this type. Right, and I'm actually going to, I'll leave everything disabled, well, unselected, which means they'll all be available. All right. The other thing that's important, because we're going to be using this field to actually handle lots of different media types, is to have a very permissive set of permissions. Now you can actually restrict this if you know you only want people to upload images or something like that, and it will respect those permissions. And finally, I'm going to allow remote media types. Okay, so pretty much this step is to enable the YouTube streaming from YouTube. Okay, so that's a remote file storage. And so we need to actually enable the video. And then we also have to enable the URI scheme, which you should recognize as a stream wrapper. It's a YouTube stream wrapper. File directory, like any file, we can dump it into a subdirectory of our public files directory. Okay, so, and actually I haven't tested it with token. I imagine like the token support's going to work because it works in, yeah, but token's not installed on this. And I'm going to actually add an unlimited number of these for testing purposes. Okay, so nothing major there, just like configuring our content type to actually work with the media module. I'm going to add some new content and hit the article, and it's just going to be a test page. And we come down here, and here is our media picker. All right, so, and a lot of you will have seen this. The 2.x branch, probably the most important change to this in the 2.x branch is this View Library tab, which is actually integration with views within the picker, which is pretty important. At the moment, that's going to be empty. The library is going to be empty because what those two tabs are looking at is files that you've actually already got on your system. All right. So to actually add a file to the system, this is fairly standard. We can just... Nah, Mulliga. This is a really bad hand solo. All right, so basically what I've done is I've uploaded a file, stored it against the node, and I'm just going to save that node. Okay, a little underwhelming. There it is. Yes, it's displaying it. It's displaying it in a format which is not particularly sort of like what I wanted, but it's working. Let's just go and have a look at how we find that file before we actually worry about the formatting. Let's just have a look at the other things that media is providing. So if I go to Find Content, you'll find an extra tab called Files. And Files is going to be where we list all of the files that have been uploaded onto the system. So that was one of the problems. We couldn't find these files to edit them or anything. We now have an option to do that, right? From this screen, you can also actually do some kind of like very primitive bulk import. So if you want to get a lot of media onto your site quickly, a couple of ways you can do it. There's a gallery module, which I'm not going to demo, but you can have a look at that. But this import media is a very quick way of actually adding a directory of images to your site. Or we can do it one by one just through an add file interface. So I'm just going to go into the import media. This is kind of like, as I said, it's quite primitive. You're just like typing in a file path on your system. So I've got them all in here. We can specify a pattern. So if I only want sort of like JPEGs to come through, I can specify a pattern there just using a sort of like a standard syntax. I can preview what's going to be imported, and you can see it's finding a lot of JPEGs in there. Right? I'm actually going to take that pattern off because there's a few video files and things that I want to import. Preview. All right, so it's grabbing all the files from that directory on my file path, and then I can just confirm that. And essentially, we're triggering the batch API to go through that list of images and actually import them. Okay, the error message. This is actually one of the error messages you're meant to get, as opposed to the other error messages we'll be looking at today. That's basically saying start and end couldn't be imported. It couldn't be imported because it was a folder, right? And it doesn't recurse through folders. It'll only look at what's in the actual directory that you've actually created. But if we go to our thumbnails tab, we now see that it's actually imported all of these systems, and now all of these files will have been sorted into their appropriate MIME types, and they'll also be available to be reused throughout the system. So it's a great way of sort of populating your library. You'll notice that some of the icons are basically defaults, and that is for movies, and you can see some sound file sort of previews. Okay, so that's all good. Let's go back to test piece of content. We're just going to use the media browser in a different way. I'm going to add another piece of media. This one I want to be a video. Right, so I can find all of those files by going to the library tab. And if you don't have many files on your system, this is fine. But basically what happens, it's an Ajax reloader. As you scroll, it's going to pull in more images. Right, so obviously that's not going to be particularly scalable. The 2.x branch gives you the view library. Okay, so you can start applying filters to your file sets from the media picker, which is pretty cool. So if I'm looking for video, I can actually drop it down. I can look for it by MIME type. So okay, I'm going to look for sorry, not images. I want yeah. If I want to add video, I'm going to sort by image. Okay, so I can actually add in any video here. Right, and it gives me my thumbnail preview. Right, I'm going to add a piece of audio, just so that we can actually, because we're going to be working through the formatting of this. Okay. No, I won't. Well, it might make you listen to it again after that. The Drupal song. All right, so I'm going to save that, and we're going to have a look at the results. Okay, again, they're all showing up. In fact, we're getting our nice little icons to tell you what kind of file types they are, but again, underwhelming. So the next stage is to actually configure these displays, and that's an area where initially I found it quite confusing because there are tabs that appear to do the same things. First, though, I want to go into this content type and specify the display modes, the formatters on the article. So I'm going to manage the display on the article, and the media is currently being displayed using generic file links. Okay, I'm going to change that to rendered file. And as soon as you go into rendered file, we get these view modes. Now that view mode actually relates to which view mode the file entity is going to be displayed using, which allows you to sort of like have quite tight control over how a file will appear in a node, and you can change that on a per node basis.
Version 1 doesn't have the rendered file?
No, it uses a media formatter. Okay, so you can actually use the media formatter, and it may be, if you're trying to apply it to a file field, you've probably got to apply the patches. Yeah. So I can change this, and I'm going to just change this into a view mode of large, and you'll see this corresponds to the view modes on the file. So what I'm basically saying is, when I look at this node, pull in the media, and when you pull in the media, have a look for the view mode on the media, which corresponds to large. And that's what we're going to configure now. But you'll notice even just doing that, when we save it, we should get a slightly better node rendering. Okay, now we're getting Han Solo in all his glory. But we still, the MP4, MP3, not rendering correctly. All right, so in order to get these to render correctly, we go to the configuration screen. Okay, I just stepped over something which has become second nature to me, but if you were going to configure files, where would you go first? If you wanted to configure the bundles, add fields to them, the display modes, I'm guessing you're going to go to structure, because that's where you do it on nodes, right? So I would have expected there to be content types and then file types, right, on this screen. It's not, there's an issue about it, but it sort of breaks the user experience of how you actually handle things. Okay. So going into the configuration, we're actually going to go into file types. And file types will look sort of familiar to you because it's very much like the way you configure node types, right? You can see all of our file types down there. Now, we're happy with sort of like the images, but the video wasn't displaying very well. So where do I go? Do I go to manage display or manage file display? Because they sound pretty similar, you know? Like, yes, it's a file, I'm managing its display. To configure the way the actual file itself is rendered, not all the metadata around it, the fields around it, we go into the manage file display. Okay, so that will actually just handle what formatters are applied to the media that we've uploaded. And you'll see that we've got lots of displays that can be enabled. Now, you'll remember that in the content type for the node, for the article, I specified large on the display formatter. So this is the large display configuration for a video file. And what I want to say is add media element video. Okay, so the media element module is providing this formatter. And I'm just going to save that. Going back to the file types, I'm just going to fix up audio as well. So manage file display, media element audio. Save that configuration. Well, thank you. Trap. Save that configuration. Go back and view our node. Okay, we've got HTML5 video player embedded via the media element widget. We've got the Drupal song, which I'm apparently not allowed to press the play button on, but it works. So you can see that's using the media element JS to actually to render a video. Remember, we didn't actually specify what kind of file type we were uploading. We just uploaded something. The file entity module actually sorted it and put it in the right place. And then this kind of like the display formatters intelligently sort of like figured out which which display format was going to be applied. I just want to add a YouTube video. I know we've got 5 minutes, so I want to add a YouTube video because I think a use case for a lot of people, we've got 3 minutes, is actually to embed YouTube video, and there's just one little gotcha there. So we select media. We go to the web tab, and we can embed a number of different actual YouTube formats. So you can just take the URL from the YouTube page. You can take the URL from the embed from the share link. And the stream wrapper for YouTube will actually have a look at it, and it will say, okay, it's this kind of link. Okay, I'm going to submit that. It's actually pulled in a bit of data. Okay, that's a cricket one. It's pulled in a bit of data. Okay, it's a thumbnail from YouTube. And if I save that, again, it's going to be not quite what we expect. Download file, right? Link to YouTube. So there we have it. Any question? No. There's actually another step to this, all right? So what's happened here, if we go back to our configuration and we actually look at our file types, and remember we're dealing with video because YouTube is actually assigned the video content type. We go to video, manage file display, and large. Okay, we've even got the formatters enabled. Okay, we've got the YouTube preview image, the YouTube video formatter enabled. But what is actually happening is you obviously can't have 3 formatters working on one piece of content at the same time. So what we've got here is all of the enabled displays, but then a bit lower down, we've got the precedence. Right? So what happens when the media module tries to theme this file with a formatter, it tries the first one in this kind of list, and if this formatter identifies itself as something that can handle this, it will actually stop there and use it as a formatter. If it says, no, I can't handle this wrapper, it'll actually drop through. Media element probably shouldn't try to render YouTube videos. Thank you. So what we need to do is just change this precedence order, because what's going to happen, if it's a YouTube video, it's going to be caught by this formatter. If it's not a YouTube video, the YouTube formatter is going to say, I can't handle sort of like public, just like MP4 file on your file system. It'll drop through to the media element video. So saving that configuration, having a look at our page again. All right, so it's pulled in our YouTube video, and it's all sort of like workable. All right, yeah, like I'm gonna have to. All right, so there are other things that we can do. We can add metadata, and we can actually. We were going to look at CK Editor integration. I'll give you the short story. You can embed images through CK Editor. You can't embed video and YouTube at the moment, although it's very, very close. Okay, so keep an eye on it. It's just a little sort of rendering issue that they're having. But yeah, well, thanks very much. And the slides will be up on the Drupal.org site. And yeah, you got to do the photos. Yeah, if there are any questions on... We got photo, yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So, all right. Okay. Oh, thanks, man.